we're going to introduce Karen Harrison, who is here from the UK, to tell us a little bit more about ALD Life and her experience on the European side of things.
Thank you. You're going to make me blush. Thank you. So, as Camille said, I'm Karen Harrison. I'm the Support Services Manager for the UK charity ALD Life, and I'm also an ALD mum. So first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm here, why I got involved with ALD. So this is a kind of synopsis of my family. So my father was diagnosed with Addison's disease at the age of 18. It was thought that the cause of his Addison's disease was probably TB, even although he had no symptoms of TB. I had identical twin sons. They were diagnosed age 6. And on the back of my son's being diagnosed with cascade testing, we found that I had a female cousin who's a carrier, and her daughter is too young to be tested. In the UK, we don't test girls until they're around about the age of 16. I have a male cousin who has AMN, and he has 2 obligate carrier daughters. My male cousin was having increasing problems with bladder dysfunction and lots of walking difficulties. He was just about to have lots of invasive tests when my boys were diagnosed, so he then went immediately for genetic testing, and AMN was found to be the cause. I also have an aunt, who is my cousin's mum's, who has very severe AMN symptoms. So these are my twins. This is Alexander on the left and Cameron on the right. So they were born in March 1996. All was well. They reached all their normal milestones. Having identical twins is always a bit of a worry because you've got one placenta. You don't know how they're going to fare when they're born. They needed no special care. There was ½ an ounce difference and ½ a centimetre difference, which is pretty tricky when you've got identical twins. So as I say, all was well until 2002. So for their 6th birthday, we took them to Disneyland, and they were fine. Prior to that, Alexander had developed a squint. I took him to an ophthalmologist who diagnosed a condition called divergence excess, which is to do with the eye muscles. We felt quite comfortable with this diagnosis, as when I was a teenager, I too developed a squint, had corrective glasses, and the squint disappeared. My sight was fine. So we didn't worry too much. You know, it kind of made sense that all the jigsaw puzzle pieces fitted. So fast forward to the summer of 2002, when I picked the boys up on the last day of school, their teacher asked me if I could have Alexander's hearing tested, because he seemed to be kind of missing out on things that were being said in the class. To be perfectly honest, we hadn't actually noticed any difference. Busy household with 2 6-year-old boys running around. So we were going on holiday the next day. We were going to our family villa in Spain, which we've been to numerous times. As soon as we got there, Alexander couldn't find his bedroom. To begin with, we thought he was joking. Then we realised that he really couldn't find his bedroom. And we spent the next 2 weeks watching Alexander, who was always the kind of roughy-tufty boy. Cameron was always the much more sensible one. And Alexander spent the whole 2 weeks holding on to Cameron and apparently not being able to hear or see us. It wasn't a great holiday, as you can imagine. So we returned home, and this is the timeline. So I won't go into great detail, but it took a very long time to actually get to who we needed to see. So on the 4th of October, we ended up in a neurologist's office. He'd looked at Alexander and he said, I think I know what's wrong with your son. My husband and I thought, fantastic, at last someone knows what's wrong with him. He said, I strongly suspect he's got leukodystrophy. That's okay. We don't know what leukodystrophy is, but that's okay. He knows what it is. We actually thought that Alexander had a brain tumour. Leukodystrophy, leukoleukemia, cancer, it's still kind of making sense. He then explained that leuko meant white, dystrophy meaning destruction of the white brain matter. Okay, so that's not so good. He said he strongly suspected it was adrenal leukodystrophy. Hang on, my dad had adrenal problems. could this be right? The neurologist just looked at us and you could see he knew that that was what was wrong with Alexander. He told us there was no treatment for him and to take him home and love him. He then asked if we had any other children. Yes, he's got an identical twin brother. It was then explained that as it's genetic, then Cameron was more than likely to have the condition. Cameron at this point was a normal little 6-year-old boy. He was doing really well in school. He'd got up a reading group, etc., etc. And then just to add something else into the mix, I was 40 weeks pregnant. Our third child was due the next day. So neither my husband or I remember driving home from the hospital. We got home and we went into complete denial. The doctor had gone for the jugular. He was going to phone us on Monday and tell us he'd got it wrong. Alexander hadn't had an MRI, hadn't had any blood tests. He'd had nothing. He'd had lots of people look at him, but no actual tests. Our parents were very, very supportive. My parents took Cameron to their house. My husband's parents took Alexander to their house. And Jonathan and I decided to go out for a curry on Saturday night. Just as we were about to leave, the phone started to ring. And my husband said, just leave it. And I said, no, I'll answer it. And it was my midwife saying, oh my goodness, I've just heard, Karen. I need to come round and make sure you're okay. Fine, heard what? So then Glenn didn't arrive that day. He was 12 days late. And he was born on the 17th of October. He's a boy. Okay, so we understand a little bit now. We didn't have Google. We didn't, there was no kind of, and I'm quite pleased for that, actually, in a lot of ways. But we did know that Glenn was at risk. But we couldn't worry about him. He was fine. He was born. He was fine. He was transportable. Cameron was then diagnosed on the 4th of November 2002. He was diagnosed through his MRI and through genetic testing. He had a less score of 8. So we knew that time was of the essence, and the wonderful doctors had already set up an appointment for the 11th of November with our very dear, who's now a very dear friend, Professor Colin Stewart. So we went off to see him, and he said, right, I'm going to transplant him. His neuropsychs were all very good. He was, there was no outward frank symptoms. So then by the 18th of November, we started his bone marrow transplant prep. We've got a kind of 6-week-old baby too. That was a lot of fun. Alexander was deteriorating at a rate of knots. My husband was Cameron's transplant. His donor. He was a haploidentical match to him, because all parents are half matched to their children. So it was the quickest way to get this BMT started. So this is Christmas 2002. As you can see, Cameron looks really happy having his Christmas lunch in hospital. Cameron rejected his first transplant, but it was okay because we'd found an unrelated donor who lived about a mile away from the hospital. So that was all great, except that on the 27th of December, she decided to pull out. She wasn't going to be Cameron's donor anymore. So we had to have lots of conversations with the doctors. What do we do? Do we give Cameron his own bone marrow back, let ALD take its course? No way. Do we try and find another donor? We can't. We haven't got time. He's been neutropenic now for too many weeks. So back to my husband. So he went through GCSF, having more stem cells, having apheresis treatment. Then, and I'm sure the transplant doctors will understand this, he'd been conditioned for a bone marrow transplant, but now we're going back to a stem cell transplant. There was quite a few head-scratching moments for the doctors in Bristol. But they did it, and Cameron had his second transplant. They used an experimental drug, which had been used in Germany, and Cameron was out of hospital by the 9th of January. During this time, Alexander continued to deteriorate. He was losing his eyesight, he was losing his hearing and his inability to chew and swallow. He was falling over. and he wanted to go back to school. This is Alexander 6 months after diagnosis. As you can see, he was very severely disabled by this time. Sadly, Alexander lost his fight 18 months after diagnosis, and we lost him in April 2004. But the good news is that Glenn, my big, strong 16-year-old, he was tested. We'd taken the stem cells from his placenta just in case he was a match for the boys, which he was a complete mismatch. But then we could use them to test for ALD, and he hasn't got ALD. We had him tested again when he was 18 months old, just to make sure. And yeah, he's doing very, very well. And he's an absolute credit and to his brothers. This is Cameron today. The transplant wasn't the success that we wanted it to be. He's now blind. He is deaf, but he isn't deaf, so he hears some things, but it's not always consistent. He has no speech, although he can say no, often to me, when I'm telling him to go to sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. He's wheelchair bound, he's fed by tube, but he still has the best laugh. And if anyone has heard, I know Kathleen has heard, and Janice have heard Cameron laugh, and he really does have the most amazing laugh. And in fact, he was given an award at his college for his laugh, and he was 22 in March. So after all this happening, I thought, what am I going to do with my life? I can't just sit at home. I can't just bury my head under the duvet, much as that was quite often what I wanted to do. So I decided, much to the joy of my husband, to return to work. But what was I going to do? I wanted to do something meaningful, but I didn't really know what. So I was reading the ALD Life newsletter, and there was a job advert. They were looking for a project manager for a project to do with Addison's disease and ALD. Right up my street. So applied, went for the interview, and very pleased to say I got the job. Which brings me very nicely into what have ALD Life been doing. So as of July 2018, we had 1,516 service users on our database. 48% of them are UK based. We support individuals in 81 countries. We have connections with 130 medical and research professionals, and between June 2017 and 2018 we welcomed 51 new service users. We actively support 110 people by email, phone and through home visits. That includes advocacy at meetings, and just kind of hand-holding and just looking after people. I do the majority of the support, so you can see I'm just a little bit busy. Now, I was asked today about how we support people. So we get to know our families really well. And when someone comes to us, we try to match people best we can. So we say take someone who's newly diagnosed and their son's doing okay. We'll match them with someone who has kind of gone past that, and their son may have had a successful bone marrow transplant, or they may never have had any sort of lesions on their brain. So I think it's really helpful to be supported by someone who's a bit further down the road. It's great to be with someone who's at the same point as you, but it's actually really useful to talk to people who are further down the line. That's the same with symptomatic children. We kind of try to sort of match people up, and peer support is just, it is so important. And having people like John, for example, to sort of be our, if he's still awake, he's not listening, to show us, you know, how good the outcomes can be, because often we get very kind of caught up in all the bad stuff and all the awful stuff. So 2018, May 2018, every 2 years we do a large community weekend. So in May we welcomed 180 people and they attended over 3 days. So it was the biggest number of people over the longest period of time. And that's just some of our lovely families. We were really pleased that Florian comes and Kathleen came, Janice has been. So it's a really wonderful environment. So we have we have presentations from around the world, from all specialities. So neurology, urology, endocrinology, any ology that you can think of. And it's just it's a really good family atmosphere where people are supporting each other. So another project which is kind of ongoing and has been ongoing for many years. So the initial project, which I was very involved with, we managed to get the Society for Endocrinology to acknowledge that ALD is a cause of Addison's disease, and it's now in their literature. They also expanded that and agreed that they would put that the sort of tests for it was very long-chain fatty acids. Prior to that, they didn't actually have ALD listed as a cause of ALD. So moving on from that, we know we still need to raise awareness amongst endocrinologists. It's a really important way of identifying those who are affected. So in the UK, paediatric doctors seem to be pretty good. They seem quite aware. You get the odd one who falls through the net, but we feel we're quite sorted there. But adult doctors are the most problematic. Why is that? Because ALD is an illness of childhood. Someone else said that a minute ago. You know, that's the kind of, you know, what a lot of doctors think. They don't think about AMN. They may not even have heard of AMN. And of course, a lot of these men who present with Addison's disease haven't got any walking difficulties. They haven't got any urinary incontinence. You know, there's nothing else going on. And of course, it's a rare cause. So we're talking small numbers in small numbers. So that's another thing that we're kind of working hard on. I go to endocrinology conferences, speak to endocrinologists, bang my drum whenever I can, and we will get there. So newborn screening. The UK have a very different system for screening. We have a UK National Screening Committee, and what they do is they advise ministers and the NHS, so that's parliamentary ministers, and the NHS in the 4 UK countries about all aspects of population screening, and they support the implementation of screening programs. So we only screen for 9 conditions, and all of them are listed there, and they all require kind of immediate treatment. So they're kind of conditions that if they're not treated pretty quickly, actually the effects can be devastating. ALD obviously is tricky for them because it doesn't need immediate treatment. So all screening is optional. The blood spots are collected on day 5. Babies can be tested up for a year old if they miss screening, so if you decide to have them screened, apart from cystic fibrosis, which is only offered up to 8 weeks. So one of the most important things we have to do in the UK is that we have to show that it's cost effective for the NHS to add something else to their screening panel. So alongside Bluebird Bio, we asked the University of Sheffield to carry out a cost effectiveness analysis. So this is a very brief introduction to cost-effective analysis. So cost-effective analysis is used to help decide whether a new intervention or treatment should be funded by the NHS. Decisions in the UK are based on the incremental cost-effectiveness ratio, the ICER. Now, to calculate the ICER, we need estimates of the total costs and health outcomes of ALD with and without newborn screening. And then the ICER is calculated by dividing the incremental costs of the screening by the incremental health benefits of screening. So it's all about the money. So the model parameters are the usual things: the natural history, incidence and phenotype distribution, survival by phenotype, survival improvement through earlier transplantation, the screening parameters, sensitivity and specificity of the test, other conditions identified, the costs, the cost of the actual screening test per person, the cost of the long-term outcomes, and the quality of life afforded by newborn screening. So the good and the bad news. So the study showed cost benefit to the NHS, cost effectiveness. The SHAR report has recently been published in the Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases, which we were really pleased with that it was accepted. And our application was submitted to the National Screening Committee in April 2016. Unfortunately, it was rejected in June 2017, but they did agree to review in 2019. They don't always agree to review, or they agree to review, but they don't give you a timeline. So their NSC's comments and concerns was the uncertainty about incidence and phenotype distributions worldwide, and that there were no UK-based studies. There was uncertainty about the benefits and disbenefits for those identified through newborn screening who will not need bone marrow transplant. So they really worry about how the effect on the family if your child is identified as a baby and may never need any treatment. What does that do to the family? They also are concerned about the long-term BMT outcomes for ALD. So Bluebird Bio are looking at the feasibility of an outcome study of transplanted versus non-transplanted boys. And this is in development, but they're very close to a final protocol. There isn't any actual studies where you can directly look at kind of what happens if you have a BMT or whether you don't. So there's also the detrimental effect of a family who have a false positive test result. They're concerned that those families think there's still something wrong with their baby. So even although it's not ALD, the family think, well, there must be something wrong, but we don't know what it is. So they say that they'll be taken to the doctor more often, they'll be taken to the hospital more often, that kind of thing. And then there's the elephant in the room, the identification of the other paroxysmal disorders that have no current treatment options. They don't take into account that actually, even although there is no treatment for, say, Zellweger's, actually that stops the diagnostic odyssey. Supportive care can be put in. The family can be supported right from the word go, rather than having many weeks of anxiety. They don't think about that, unfortunately. So our next steps are collaboration with other groups seeking newborn screening. So whether it's for ALD or whatever condition, we need to collaborate because together we've got a bigger voice and we're stronger. ALD is being used as a case study on a genetic alliance project to challenge the current criteria of the National Screening Committee. The Genetic Alliance is an umbrella organisation of several, I think it's something like 140 patient support groups. We're gathering information from you guys, and we're so thankful for everything that you know, all the information you share with us. It's really, really important and helpful. We need to concentrate on demonstrating more good than harm, and obviously we need qualitative and quantitative data. So my last thing is to say thank you so much. Grateful thanks to Bluebird Bio for their continued support, and you know, they've been so fantastic to us. Of course, all you involved in the newborn screening in the USA, you know, we kind of wouldn't be here without you. And you know, sharing your information, you know, ongoing is just, it's fantastic. And well done and congratulations for everyone's efforts so far. And so team, together everyone achieves more. Thank you.
I was wondering if they considered Addison's a disease worth treating?
So Addison's is within, kind of reason for applying for newborn screening, but they don't take it as a kind of individual sort of disease. It's just kind of part of the disease.